Here are 5 expensive retirement mistakes I see all the time. My name is Daniel, founder of McCluskey Financial, and the first is viewing Social Security the wrong way. What you need to understand when you're deciding to file for Social Security benefits that you earned is that it's not always a decision that needs to be made separately from other factors that are going to affect your retirement. For example, I just did a video that I released of a 60-year-old with around $500,000 trying to decide if he was going to be able to retire, and if so, when to file for Social Security. Well, because there's a lot of different YouTube videos or information online suggesting different things for different situations, you can start to be convinced that a certain age is going to be best for you. However, in that video, what we showed, instead of just looking at how he could get the most amount of money from Social Security or maximize his benefit or take what's his, instead we ran some numbers to see what his probability of success would be in retirement, otherwise not running out of money based on historical data if he filed at 62, 63, all the way up to 70. And what we showed is the difference between filing at 67 versus 62 was quite a big increase. But then if he waited not to take it at 67, but all the way until 70, his probability of success actually drastically decreased because he was putting more strain on his specific portfolio. So big lesson here is, instead of viewing Social Security separate from all your other income or any other assets that you might be leveraging in retirement, you may want all of those to be working on the same team towards the same mission. For example, if a military is trying to do some sort of rescue mission, and they have guys going in on the ground, they have guys going in from above, and they have snipers far away in the distance but still on the ground, they're going to want all of those people working in unison towards the same goal. The snipers know what the people on the ground are doing. He knows what their plans are. The people on the ground know when the people in the air are going to come through to make sure they have that extra support, and everyone's working towards that same mission. In a similar fashion, all the different vehicles can be used to work together in retirement to accomplish your goals. Second is thinking that your 401k, your 403b, your pension that your workplace is offering you is going to be enough for you to be able to retire. Now, that's not to say that it can't be the case, because it certainly can. However, retirement is really just a game of making sure whatever your expenses are, that there is income that's going to be able to cover that. Now, of course, there's other goals in terms of leaving money behind or giving money to grandchildren, but at least at its very core, in relation to just you, you're just trying to cover your expenses. So maybe instead of just thinking, well, I have Social Security here that I'm able to take, and I'm putting money away into my retirement plan, so therefore I must be okay for retirement, instead, you may want to view things as, what are my current expenses, and what are my expenses expected to be in retirement, and what type of money am I going to need to be able to accomplish that goal? Is my 401k going to be able to produce that amount of income on top of Social Security? Is my pension going to be able to produce that amount of income on top of Social Security, etc.? Number 3, waiting until a certain age or hitting a certain amount of money to actually sit down and run retirement projections. Now, this can reveal 2 very unfortunate things. First and foremost is the obvious. You can get there and realize you might have to work much longer than you expected. Or secondly, maybe even worse, you might realize that you could have retired 2, 3, 5 years earlier just because you never sat down and ran those calculations to see, if I need this much to cover all my expenses, how much do I actually need to accomplish that? And I'll give an example of a client that I worked with a while back, and he had constantly been putting money in all these different places. He had a 401k, he had a Roth IRA, he had some other different vehicles. He kind of calculated out his Social Security, and he was very concerned with trying to find out, where else can I contribute money? What's the next place to contribute to? But he had never actually sat down and saw where that was actually getting him. He was just trying to get the highest number possible, diversifying himself across a bunch of different strategies, but really with no real understanding of how much income all of those assets might be able to produce for him, when he might be able to retire, when he might be able to retire his wife, etc. Hey, and real quick, if you're finding this video helpful, leave a like and let me know. Back to it. Number 4, underestimating how much you will actually spend in retirement. And this one's a killer, because even if you prepare, even if you run the numbers, if you find out that those expenses are different, that could change everything. I remember actually with one of my earliest clients, I'm also guilty of this as well, but the first time I asked him what his projected expenses would be in retirement, he said something around $4,000. Then he went back and actually calculated what's coming out of his bank account or what's on his credit card statement, and what that number was much closer to $5,000, so around $60,000 a year, and he told me he thinks this is really high. However, when you subtract those expenses from what his actual net income was after taxes, there should have been much more money going away into saving or somewhere else. And when we really looked at the numbers and dove deeper, we noticed, and this happens all the time, that $5,000 a month was an accurate number. However, we had forgot to factor in things like upcoming weddings, like vacations, like those one-off random expenses to fix your car, to go to the hospital. So a solution to this is to look at your real spending over the past 2 to 3 years, again, going through those credit card statements, going through your bank accounts, and even still, it may be in your best interest once you get that number to inflate it a little bit higher. Number 5, underestimating inflation even as it is just now, and additional inflationary risks of it getting even higher. Many people know with the national debt crisis, with Social Security and Medicare solvency issues, with the deficit, the US government really has 3 options. They can either print more money, which of course is going to cause inflation, they can cut spending, or they can raise revenues, the amount of money they're taking in. Their go-to for quite some time has been printing more money. So inflation, on average, just rising by 1-2% might not be that unrealistic. Most retirement softwares nowadays, you can pretty easily run some numbers and see if this is going to be a big concern for you. But even just 1 or 2% higher every single year on average can make a massive difference in terms of how much money you might need to live. Second is, most people know that Social Security has a cost of living adjustment, which basically is trying to increase each year to keep up with what inflation is. Now, first off, this does tend to lag a little bit behind, just at least in recent history, of what actual inflation was, but not by too much. However, it's also being proposed as a solution to these Social Security solvency issues to potentially reduce this. This could be another big factor, especially those who really rely on Social Security. And third is pension adjustments. If you have a pension, if you have an annuity, a lot of those don't have inflation adjustments. So if you're going to be able to cover your expenses in year 1, that doesn't necessarily mean it's enough to cover your expenses all the way throughout retirement, just because of inflation existing. Now that you understand these 5 mistakes, watch the breakdown on screen now. I mentioned in point 1 of how filing for Social Security at 67 versus 62 or 70 drastically increased the probability of success for this couple, because this could cost you your retirement.